The suffocating silence of the Forrester Creations executive suite was abruptly shattered by a desperate act of criminality, forever altering the trajectory of the ongoing corporate war. Steffy Forrester Finnegan, the fiercely independent co-CEO, had remained behind after a grueling late shift, her mind occupied by the relentless battle against the Logan brand. The towering glass walls of the building, usually a symbol of her family's insurmountable power, offered no protection against the looming threat lurking in the shadows. Deke Sharp, a man pushed to the absolute brink of his psychological limits, had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Driven by a twisted, all-consuming desire to prove his unwavering loyalty to Hope Logan Spencer, Deke crossed a line from which there could be no return, orchestrating a brazen kidnapping that would plunge Los Angeles into unprecedented chaos. Deke's motivations were rooted in a deep, agonizing well of insecurity and a desperate yearning for validation. Having recently been given the opportunity of a lifetime by Hope to join her secret new fashion venture at the Logan brand, Deke felt an overwhelming, almost suffocating pressure to deliver. He knew that Hope had sacrificed everything to launch this rival line. However, the crown jewel of Hope's legacy, the Hope for the Future brand, remained firmly in Steffy's iron grip. In Deke's fractured mind, the only way to truly cement his worth and guarantee Hope's ultimate victory was to forcefully extract the copyright from Steffy. He convinced himself that this catastrophic crime was an act of profound devotion, a necessary evil to elevate Hope to the throne she rightfully deserved. The execution of the ambush was as swift as it was terrifying. As Steffy made her way through the dimly lit, deserted parking garage of Forrester Creations, the sharp click of her heels echoing in the cavernous space, Deke emerged from the darkness. Before she could scream or summon security, he overpowered her, his desperate strength fueled by a dangerous cocktail of adrenaline and misguided loyalty. The transition from the pristine, glamorous epicenter of the fashion world to the trunk of a nondescript vehicle marked the beginning of a harrowing nightmare. Deke's actions were clumsy but effective, driven by a manic energy that left no room for hesitation. He sped away into the night, leaving behind only the eerie silence of the parking structure and the impending storm that would soon engulf both families. The destination was an abandoned warehouse on the desolate outskirts of the city, a rotting monument to industrial decay that stood in stark contrast to the luxurious world Steffy inhabited. The air inside was thick with the suffocating stench of mildew and rusted metal, the only illumination provided by a single, flickering overhead bulb that cast long, sinister shadows against the concrete walls. When Steffy finally regained consciousness, the harsh reality of her situation came into sharp focus. She found herself bound tightly to a splintered wooden chair, the coarse ropes biting into her wrists and ankles. The cold, damp environment was designed to break her spirit, to instill a paralyzing fear that would make her pliable to Deke's demands. Yet, the quintessential Forrester fire ignited within her. Stepping into the harsh pool of light, Deke presented his ultimate demand, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a stack of legal documents. The papers were a legally binding contract that would irrevocably transfer the complete copyright and intellectual property of the Hope for the Future brand to the Logan Fashion House. Deke's voice, though laced with a frantic edge, attempted to project authority as he ordered Steffy to sign her family's legacy away. He meticulously laid out his twisted rationale, explaining that her signature was the only key to her freedom. He believed that presenting these signed documents to Hope would be the ultimate grand gesture, a triumph that would instantly validate his existence and secure his position as the indispensable architect of the Logan brand's future. However, Deke vastly underestimated the unbreakable spirit and the sheer, terrifying willpower of Steffy Forrester Finnegan. Instead of crumbling into a weeping, terrified victim as he had anticipated, Steffy tilted her chin upward, her dark eyes blazing with a potent mixture of absolute disgust and dark, mocking amusement. She refused to yield an inch of her power, recognizing immediately that Deke was not a mastermind, but a pathetic, desperate pawn playing a game far beyond his comprehension. Even bound and physically vulnerable, Steffi dominated the psychological space of the warehouse. She weaponized her words, delivering a masterclass in psychological warfare designed to completely dismantle Deke's fragile ego and expose the pathetic reality of his misguided crusade to impress Hope Logan. With a voice dripping with venomous condescension, Steffi began to systematically tear Deke apart. She laughed a cold, hollow laugh that echoed off the damp walls, mocking his profound inferiority and his pathetic desperation for Hope's approval. "You think this makes you a hero?" she sneered, her words cutting through the damp air like a finely honed blade. She labeled him a disposable tool, a stray dog begging for scraps from the Logan table. Steffi ruthlessly exploited his deepest insecurities, assuring him that Hope would never view him as an equal. She taunted him with the reality that his actions would not secure Hope's empire, but would instead guarantee his own permanent destruction, reducing his grand gesture to the pathetic flailing of a man who would always be fundamentally beneath them. The relentless barrage of Steffi's insults struck Deke with the force of a physical blow, pushing him dangerously close to the edge of total psychological collapse. The veins in his neck bulged against his skin, his knuckles turning a stark, bone white as he gripped the edge of the table. He fought a terrifying, agonizing internal war against his own violent impulses. Every fiber of his being screamed to silence her mocking voice, to strike out and force her to show the fear and respect he so desperately craved. Yet, he knew that physically harming her would destroy the very purpose of his mission. He needed her signature, and a battered Steffi would invalidate the legal documents. The tension in the warehouse reached a suffocating crescendo as Deke hovered on the precipice of losing all control. Miles away from the gritty nightmare of the warehouse, the idyllic tranquility of the Cliff House was slowly being consumed by an encroaching, icy dread. John Finnegan paced the length of the living room, his medical intuition and profound love for his wife sounding a blaring internal alarm. Steffi was meticulous about her schedule, and her prolonged, unexplained absence after a late shift was entirely out of character. The untouched dinner on the counter and the series of unread text messages painted a terrifying picture. Finn's heart pounded against his ribs as he realized that the corporate hostility surrounding Forrester Creations had likely escalated into something far more sinister. The protective instincts of a husband shifted into overdrive, propelling Finn out the door and into the night. Finn's first desperate call was to Ridge Forrester, a man already burdened by the immense weight of the escalating corporate warfare and internal family strife. When Ridge heard the panic in his son-in-law's voice, the blood drained from his face. The realization that his daughter was missing struck Ridge with the force of a physical blow, instantly overshadowing the petty squabbles over fashion lines. Ridge immediately mobilized the formidable resources of the Forrester family, his parental panic transforming into a cold, terrifying resolve. They converged on the Forrester Creations building, finding Steffi's empty office and her car still parked in the garage, confirming their absolute worst fears. A frantic search operation was launched, with Ridge and Finn leading the charge into the darkness. Across town, within the heavily fortified walls of the Logan fashion empire, a different kind of panic was beginning to take root. Hope Logan Spencer was already drowning in the immense pressure of launching her new, secret fashion line, a defection that had fractured her family. Amidst the chaos of fabric swatches and marketing strategies, Hope noticed a glaring, unsettling anomaly. Deke Sharp was entirely unaccounted for. His phone went straight to voicemail, and his usual eager presence was conspicuously absent. Initially, Hope brushed it off as a minor inconvenience, but as the hours ticked by, a cold sensation of dread began to crawl up her spine. She remembered the intense, almost manic fervor in Deke's eyes when he had sworn his absolute loyalty to her, his desperate promises to secure her legacy. As Hope paced her office, her mind began to frantically connect the terrifying dots. She knew Deke harbored a deep-seated resentment towards Steffy for the way the Forresters had treated him, and she knew his desperation to prove himself was a dangerous, volatile fuel. The horrifying realization that Deke might have taken matters into his own hands, interpreting her frustration over the hope for the future line as a mandate for violence, struck her like a physical blow. The sheer magnitude of the impending disaster if Deke's crime were exposed threatened to obliterate everything Hope had sacrificed so much to build. If the authorities discovered that her newly appointed lead designer had kidnapped the co-CEO of Forrester Creations, Hope's career would be instantaneously and permanently destroyed. Furthermore, the fallout would not be contained to Hope alone. It would trigger an unprecedented legal and financial catastrophe for the entire Spencer family. Brooke Logan Forrester has spent her entire adult life meticulously building castles in the sky, fiercely protecting her idealized vision of a unified family and a dominant, unshakable legacy at Forrester Creations. For weeks, she has operated under a profound and tragic delusion, relentlessly pressuring Ridge and Steffy Forrester to grant her daughter, Hope, a definitive relaunch date for the marginalized Hope for the Future line. Brooke's maternal instinct, though fiercely protective in its intent, completely blinded her to the grim, undeniable reality of Steffy's iron-fisted, condescending leadership. She adamantly refused to see the writing on the wall, clinging to the desperate, naive belief that her historical influence and romantic connection to Ridge could magically mend the deep-seated corporate fractures that were actively destroying her daughter's spirit. But illusions, no matter how desperately they are guarded by a mother's love, are inherently fragile constructs, inevitably destined to shatter when finally confronted with the brutal, unforgiving force of the truth. The truth, in this tragic instance, was a meticulously guarded secret that had been silently festering right under Brooke's nose, masterfully orchestrated by the people she least suspected. Hope Logan Spencer, pushed to her absolute psychological breaking point by Steffy's relentless mockery, arrogant dismissals, and the agonizing stagnation of her life's work, had already made her definitive choice. She had defected. The ink was already dry on a highly lucrative, creatively liberating, and intensely secret contract with the newly minted Logan brand, spearheaded by none other than her aunt, Katie Logan Spencer, and the formidable Bill Spencer. For Brooke, the sudden, shocking discovery of this clandestine agreement was not merely a professional setback or a corporate miscommunication. It was a visceral, soul-crushing betrayal that struck at the very core of her identity as a mother, a sister, and a self-appointed matriarch of the Logan family. The revelation violently ripped the blinders from her eyes, replacing her naive optimism with a blinding, uncontrollable, and deeply destructive rage. As the devastating reality of the secret contract washed over Brooke, her psychological state rapidly deteriorated from profound shock to a venomous, unadulterated fury that consumed her every thought. In her increasingly distorted mind, this was not a pragmatic business decision made by an empowered, independent daughter seeking creative freedom and professional respect. This was a calculated, malicious theft orchestrated by her own flesh and blood. She vividly envisioned Katie, the sister she had so often patronized, protected, and underestimated throughout their lives, sitting in her sleek new executive office, actively plotting to steal her daughter and weaponize her against Forrester Creations. The narrative Brooke frantically constructed was one of ultimate victimization, framing Katie as a predatory opportunist who had callously exploited Hope's emotional vulnerability, capitalizing on her professional despair to execute a sinister agenda. Consumed entirely by this toxic, paranoid narrative, Brooke embarked on a terrifying warpath toward the Logan Fashion House headquarters. Her strides were sharp, aggressive, and purposeful, her posture rigid with an explosive tension that signaled an impending, catastrophic eruption. The pristine, modern corridors of the Logan building seemed to physically chill as she passed, her mere presence radiating a dictatorial authority that demanded absolute submission from anyone in her path. She was no longer the diplomatic peacemaker or the endlessly hopeful mother. She was a matriarch scorned, a woman whose absolute control over her family's destiny had been shockingly usurped. Every step she took was heavily fueled by decades of complex, sibling rivalry, a lifetime of unresolved romantic resentments involving Bill Spencer, and the terrifying, paralyzing realization that she was rapidly losing her grip on the daughter she had so carefully molded in her own image. Brooke stormed into Katie's executive office like a Category 5 hurricane making landfall, instantly obliterating the tranquil, triumphant atmosphere that Katie and Bill had so carefully cultivated following their massive global success. The heavy, polished wooden door slammed against the wall with a deafening, violent crack, signaling the definitive arrival of chaos. Katie, who had been peacefully reviewing the spectacular global metrics of her debut fashion collection on her monitor, looked up, her initial expression of mild surprise quickly hardening into a mask of stoic, impenetrable defiance. She had always anticipated this moment. She knew that hiding Hope's massive defection would eventually invite Brooke's legendary wrath. However, Katie was entirely unprepared for the sheer, unhinged ferocity and pure hatred that radiated from her older sister's eyes as she crossed the threshold. Before Katie could even utter a single word of greeting, explanation, or defense, Brooke crossed the expansive room in a terrifying blur of motion. The air in the luxurious office seemed to literally snap with the static electricity of their impending collision. Driven by a primal, uncontrollable rage that bypassed all logic and sisterly affection, Brooke raised her hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across Katie's face. The sharp, sickening crack of skin against skin reverberated through the spacious suite, serving as a brutal, unforgettable punctuation mark to the end of their lifelong bond. It was a physical, violent manifestation of Brooke's internal chaos, a desperate, pathetic attempt to physically assert dominance over a situation that had completely and irreversibly spiraled out of her control. The sheer force of the impact snapped Katie's head violently to the side, leaving a stark, crimson imprint blooming instantly on her pale cheek. "How could you?" Brooke shrieked, her voice trembling with a volatile mixture of perceived heartbreak and absolute, unadulterated venom. She did not wait for a response, launching immediately into a blistering, hysterical tirade that echoed through the executive suite and likely into the hallways beyond. She aggressively accused Katie of being a manipulative, cold-hearted predator, a bitter, jealous sibling who had deliberately and maliciously preyed upon Hope's darkest moments of vulnerability. In Brooke's deeply distorted reality, Katie had not offered Hope a professional lifeline. She had lured her into a treacherous trap, utilizing the young designer's desperation and Steffy's cruelty to execute a sick, twisted revenge plot. Brooke screamed at the top of her lungs that Katie was using Hope as a mere pawn in a 20-year vendetta, a calculated, unforgivable strike designed specifically to punish Brooke for her past romantic transgressions and betrayals with Bill Spencer. Katie, her cheek burning with intense physical pain and her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, slowly and deliberately turned her head back to face her sister. The physical sting of the violent slap was absolutely nothing compared to the profound emotional severing she felt in that exact moment. But Katie did not cower. She did not crumble under the suffocating weight of Brooke's dictatorial rage, nor did she revert to the meek, submissive younger sister role she had played for so much of her life. Instead, she stood tall, her posture radiating a quiet, unyielding, and terrifyingly calm strength. The days of Katie Logan absorbing Brooke's collateral damage were officially over. She looked Brooke dead in the eye, her gaze a fortified fortress of unwavering resolve, and delivered a response that sliced through Brooke's hysterical, screaming accusations with surgical, devastating precision. "I didn't lure her, Brooke. Katie stated, her voice dangerously calm, providing a stark, chilling contrast to Brooke's erratic, unhinged screaming. Hope came to me. She came to a place where her immense talent is actually respected, where she isn't forced to beg for scraps at the table of Steffy Forrester. Katie systematically and ruthlessly dismantled Brooke's deeply held delusions, pointing out the undeniable, objective reality of Hope's